Hi guys, I'm Woodcraft Hamster and I thought I'd do a quick video for you today about traditional bushcrafters. Now you might remember a little while ago I did a similar video on traditional woodcrafters and really it was talking about the sort of the maybe slightly romanticised view we have of those kind of people. And I have a very similar thought on bushcrafters and really I mean the term bushcraft is a fairly modern phrase, at least in the way most of us apply it, but essentially in my mind it goes back to early pioneers, even Aboriginal peoples, things like that. And the further you go back in history, the more the skills that bushcraft relates to come into play. And essentially, the way I'm looking at it is that it is things like shelter building, fire making, even things like hunting and food preparation, all those kind of skills that people would have to rely on whilst out in the bush. Now that refers to really anywhere in the world, but basically, people have this very, very, again, I suppose, romanticised view of early bushcrafters. And these people, could go out into the wilderness and survive for extended periods of time. But on the flip side of that, I think a lot of these people, a lot of people seem to think that these people went out completely unprepared, or with very, very minimal kit. And in some cases that's correct. But if you kind of think about it logically, if you know that you are going out for a month, 3 months, 6 months, and you're not going to be coming across habitation or places where you can purchase or trade for goods, you're not going to go out there unprepared. You are going to take at least the items that you require, not only for your survival, to make life comfortable. You forget kind of the military applications of this for a second, because obviously there were limitations there, and we know that during periods of warfare, supplies and things like that were very, very hard to come by. But if you take a standard, I don't know, let's say someone that's going out hunting and trapping, for example, and then that's how they make their living. So they're out in the bush for long periods of time, and these people would be taking a lot of the fundamentals with them. There would be a knife, there would be probably an axe, maybe a saw. You would have a tarpaulin or a tent or some kind of shelter. And these people would be taking things with them in preparation. So people of that sort of time period would be using things like flint and steel. That was the standard method of lighting a fire. And don't get me wrong, there would have been people who could very easily make fire with friction methods and things like that. But if you had the choice between the two, and I suppose that's the crux of this video, you would take something that would give you a more guaranteed way of making a fire, or a more guaranteed way of making a shelter, because in all honesty, why wouldn't you? It goes even further to things like, if you've got a flint and steel, people would generally have a pouch or a tin or some sort of container with their charred material. You generally, again, historical sources are a little bit light on this, but I cannot believe that people would go out without the things that would make their life easier. Now don't get me wrong, things happen. If somebody was travelling, say, by canoe, and you had all of your equipment on there and the canoe capsized, your stuff fell out and you lost a lot of your equipment, then yes, absolutely, you're then in a survival situation. And I think a lot of the romanticism comes, and this is quite a true sort of fact, if you like, the people that were going out doing this did have the skills that in the very worst case scenarios they could survive without some of the kit they'd taken with them. You look at people, that are doing stuff like this, and even the military here. You may have a big pack with all of your gear in it, but actually, what you would also almost always have would be a belt kit. Now, a belt kit's a fairly military style thing, but a lot of other people use them, and you would have the real grassroots fundamentals that you would need to survive. You would have a knife, you would have your fire kit, you might have a few other little bits and pieces on there, but those were the bits you needed to survive. But going back to that sort of slightly romanticised view, and there are a lot of bushcrafters out there who are very traditional in the way they think, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And there's a lot of people who try to sort of copy maybe copy's not the right word. I mean, mimic doesn't really do it either. But there are people that try to recreate. That's probably the better term for it. Recreate the conditions that these people would have been in, and see if they can survive in the same set of circumstances. You know, you've got people who are taking out canvas packs and wool blankets and those kind of things, and I've tried this in the past. I tend to find it's not quite so comfortable as using modern kit, and I suppose that's the other thing about this particular video, and a bit like the traditional woodcraft carvers, is that if you went back a few hundred years and you offered somebody a modern fire still, or a modern downfilled sleeping bag, or something like a tent or a hammock setup that kind of would take up half the space and half the weight of your traditional woolen canvas, I suspect very strongly these people would bite your hand off, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what period of history that you're in, people generally would have been using the best available, or at least the best available to them, equipment. Now obviously if you're in a very sort of poor community or something like that, hunters and trappers and people like that generally weren't that well off. They would be living out in the bush for most of the year. They may have a house or a hut or something like that they would live in during the cold periods and stuff like that. But generally these people didn't have a lot of money to throw away. Certainly not the disposable income society that we have now. But what they may do is trade furs or sell furs and then use that money to buy equipment that was particularly useful for them, whether that was a good quality knife or a hatchet or a tomahawk or something along those lines. Things like metal containers for boiling water in. These are the sort of things you can't generally make for yourself. These were specialist trades. And likewise today, we have an absolute abundance of choice today. The internet has revolutionised things. Any of us can now go online, and whether you're on a budget or whether you've got money to burn, you can pick various bits and pieces to suit your needs and your budget, and you can buy pretty much what you need. Now again, I think a lot of us as bushcrafters do it because we enjoy, not only do we enjoy being out in nature, but we enjoy learning traditional skills. Now I think most of you watching this are probably fairly good at lighting fires, shelter building, cooking on an open fire, that kind of thing, and it's something we do because we enjoy it. But the traditional bushcrafters, and I'm using that phrase, it's not quite correct, but these guys were doing this because they had to do it. They didn't have the option of getting into a 4x4 to go across country. They didn't have the option of or the wealth of options that we have in terms of choosing kits. So they were using what they had available, but again, as I say, I really don't believe that these people were going out with next to nothing, unless that was their only option. You wouldn't just walk out of your house for a month in the bush with just the clothes on your back. I do genuinely do not believe that was the case. But what I do believe is that the people that were doing this had a much stronger set of skills than most of us will have today. Even those people that are pretty much full-time bushcrafters, these people that are running courses and stuff like that, who are absolutely superb at what they do. They're probably the closest we've got today for what I would class as traditional bushcrafters, because these people were living this day in and day out, and that's the thing to remember. This wasn't something they were doing as many of us would do as a hobby, as a pastime. These people were relying on this. Now you could say that if we went away for a week or a weekend, we do have to rely on our skills to get a fire going, but I suspect, like me, most people will have things like a backup method of fire lighting. You'll have a backup shelter method. So if you want to go out for a weekend, or certainly if I do, I might say, do you know what, this weekend I'm going to go and do a really traditional bushcrafting weekend, and I'm going to build my own shelter, and I'm going to get a fire started with either a friction method or a flint and steel or something like that, and that's my goal for that weekend. But I would be absolutely stupid not to take maybe some matches or a lighter, and at least maybe a tarp, just in case I couldn't get things working, or I could, for some reason something went wrong. I mean, I've lost count of the times I've gone out and built a shelter, just sort of like debris shelters and things like that. The weather has turned later in the evening, and I found out, oh, it's not quite as waterproof as I thought it was, and I've had to basically, pull out the tarp, rig it up over the top, and at least then I've got a dry night's sleep. Whereas, the traditional people, generally, if you were relying on that kind of thing, if you would get wet, and that's the crux of it, really. But really, I've rambled on for a little while, guys. But I just wanted to put a few thoughts out there. My views on traditional bushcrafters, and kind of, I really the what it boils down to is, I think, these guys were, don't get me wrong, they were limited in what they could use. Just by what was available at that period of history, depending on where you're looking at. But at the same time, I still believe that they would have been using the best equipment they would have had, and even simple things like, they would have been taking, comfort items with them. These guys may have been taking, a bag of coffee, or this kind of stuff, and it wasn't about real subsistence living, and it wasn't about just kind of making do with whatever you could find while you were out there. These people would have had, dried meats and flour and, all other kind of things to take with them, because, why wouldn't you? And I think, we often, when we're talking about traditional bushcrafters, we often think that these guys were in a sort of a permanent state of a survival situation, which I really just don't think is true. But I'd be really interested to hear your comments and your thoughts about this, guys. It's a topic that I talk about quite often with people on forums or in person, and I thought it was just about time that I did a video, kind of giving my views on it, and I'd be really interested to hear yours. So I hope it was useful, guys. As usual, comments and questions in the box below. Hit like and subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I hope you'll all join me next time. Thanks, guys.